I'd like to ask the Minister a couple of questions, given that she has repeatedly said that she's committed to better outcomes for disabled people. However, we don't really see that outlined in the budget at all. I've got a couple of specific questions around. I'll start with the minimum wage exemption. I do note that the Minister has said that has noted that she's been asked this by other members before, but I have quite a specific question because the Minister has said in his own record, saying from memory during the estimates hearing as well, that the reason for scrapping the work on the minimum wage exemption and deciding not to scrap the exemption itself, which of course is part of Budget 24, and returning the money that was put aside for that to the centre. The Minister has said that this is because Disability Enterprises has come out and said that they cannot guarantee that jobs will not be lost as a result. I have spoken to them since, and that is not the understanding. What we have heard from them is that they wanted the detail of the policies that was announced by the prior Labour government. So given that that's not what they have said, and I cannot see that in any quotes from them in any media as well, I'd really like to know from the Minister why she made the decision to do that, if that's not a purely cost-cutting exercise, as it is being seen by disability communities more broadly. That is my first question. I'd like to know whether 37 million that was earmarked for the minimum wage exemption to be scrapped, where is that going, is one question that I'd like to know. The second is really around baseline funding that was earmarked for this year for the EGL rollout, the Enabling Good Lives rollout, which is now being used to shift DSS to the Ministry for Social Development. Given that that's baseline funding within the estimates, I would like to know why she's decided to use that funding to make this shift, given that there's been absolutely no evidence in any of the reviews that this is actually going to lead to good outcomes for disabled people. I'd also like to know how she's committed to better outcomes, given that she has cut access to flexible funding. She's put a freeze on residential care, which means that some of the most intellectually disabled New Zealanders will not gain access to residential care. She's paused EGL, and as I mentioned, now using money that was earmarked, the budget that was earmarked for 2024's EGL rollout, to shift DSS into MSD, a ministry that does not have the capacity, capability, nor the inclination to be able to administer disability support services. And she's gutting Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People, a ministry that disability communities fought for many years. I'd also like to know, Minister, where the 1.1 billion that was earmarked in Budget 24 is actually going, because as far as I can tell, no one within the sector knows where that money is going either, and would like some transparency around that in Budget 24, because really all the sector is feeling at the moment is considerable anxiety and distress because of reviews that have led to changes that were not even recommended within the review. So if this Minister is saying that she's committed to better outcomes for disabled people, where are they?
Mr. Chair, I thank the member for the question because it gives me the opportunity to put the facts on record, which is quite different from what the member was referring to. I also didn't address the comment about tangata whaikaha from the previous member's question, and I would just remind the House about the increase in investment of $1.1 billion, which the previous member has asked about. So let me, I didn't want to repeat things that I'd made in the opening statement, but let me go back to make it clear to the member. The unfortunate reality is that the Disability Support Service was getting to a period where it was running out of its appropriation. And it was not necessary for it to do that. It was not necessary for it to do it. So in previous years, if you look 8 to 10 years earlier, the increases, if the member wants to hear the answer, I'm happy to do so. If they're not, then I will return to my seat. So the increases were in the sort of 2 to 3 to 4% on an annual basis. In the previous 3, 4, 5 years, they went to double digits. So no one could explain double-digit increases. And so that is why the unfortunate reality of Whaikaha being in a situation where they were running out of their appropriation. So what did the government do? The $1.1 billion included $80 million to ensure that Whaikaha could continue to provide disability support services to the 30th of June, and it covered that appropriation. Yes, it did mean some changes to the guidelines around flexible funding, and I appreciate that that was incredibly stressful at the time. So the review was necessary. It found far more than we expected it to. As I said, it is not a failure of funding with the increase of the $1.1 billion. It is a failure of the system that the previous government set up in a rush and just set these very high expectations and then left it to be. There is an incredible disparity across New Zealand for disabled people in terms of the services and support they can access. That's clearly unfair. And it's not sustainable at the moment. So the first thing we have to do, in answering the member's question about enabling good lives, our government is committed to the vision and principles of enabling good lives. What we are doing at this point in time is stabilising the system before we seek to improve it. And for those of you who have been involved with a business or an organisation that is broken and failing, job number one, stabilise it. Stabilise it. That's what we're doing with urgency. And the independent review panel made some recommendations. One of them was to maintain the level of funding to residential providers at last year's rate, while a rapid review into pricing can be undertaken to understand why, despite there being fewer people in residential care, the increase in costs is over 30%. Right? So understanding what is driving the increase in costs is pretty fundamental in stabilising the ship, and that is exactly what we are doing. So in terms of the funding allocated for Enabling Good Lives, yes, as I said, job number one is stabilise the system. That is why we have had to set up a task force. They have a range of work Two of the future pieces of work that members will be really interested in is looking at flexible funding, looking at the guidelines, what should the rules be. This government fully understands the value disabled people place on choice and control and flexibility, which is why, with these recommendations, it is absolutely critical that we understand and can decide together with disabled people, organisations, families and carers what those rules should be. Too little, too late. Well, actually, that former minister should have made sure the organisation was set up to be successful, because disabled people have paid the price for that, and I think that's really unfortunate. What we are committed to doing is fixing the system, getting to a place where disabled people have greater access, fairer access. We are targeting the support based on those who have the highest needs. And I also want to address the issue of creating a standalone ministry. So instead of FICAR, the Ministry of Disabled People, Mr Chair.
Honourable Louise Upson.
So much of it. Oh.
Please release your tensions, Blake, because you are personally affected by the minister's actions.
Yeah. How can we get services if she cuts the wall? And
Good question.
And the only reason why the industry is in crisis is because of her government, not Labour. She blames Labour, but she's done all of this damage in 6 months. So she can't blame Labour.
I'm with Tui Ono on this one. I was watching his expressions in the background, which, going through all his paperwork, and it's like, what?
Yeah, you can tell he's definitely like, bullshit.
But what was the issue? Like, I understand that all of those, the working for families think that everyone got like $60 to $200.
Yeah, no, this is separate from working for families.
And then the pensioners only got $2 and the disability people got $2. Was this an issue? I mean, that...
it would be a completely separate budget. So the thing with Waikaha was they had what was known as called flexible funding payment. Blake, correct me if I get anything wrong here.
Yeah.
But the principle behind that was to give the person who is disabled more discretionary in ways that their funds could be spent to better suit their needs, rather than having a one-size-fits-all approach. And a good example that can be brought up here that is like Huhana Hiki. Her biggest gripe in Auckland is the fact that she can only get around by train. And the solution to people who are mobile go, why don't you just catch a wheelchair taxi that isn't available?
Yep.
Because she's got a more bigger than normal wheelchair. Like her biggest issue in Wellington is the fact that, she can get from Wellington Airport to Wellington CBD on the bus, but she can't get around by, basically there's no wheelchair taxis after 6 p.m. in Wellington until 7 a.m. in the morning, and 75% of the day they are taken up with MOE runs.
So more discretionary and more contextual would be something that Blake would be, and those with disability would look for or hope for, is it? Rather than one size fits all.
Correct.
Yes. And you are saying that because of what the current government has done and for disability people, is that they have created a one size fits all? But I thought, like, if you need a wheelchair, they would of course grant the provisions to buy a wheelchair. So it's still discretionary.
It's also like things like what's it called? Some people with autism can't speak, so they may be given a tablet that can communicate. Greg O'Connor's son is one of those people in that boat, Michael. Michael don't speak at all. However, Michael can communicate effectively using the tablet with a text-to-speech software. But some people might say, that's a luxury, that's unnecessary, not realising that it's a fundamental foundation for that person to communicate in society. And so, and that's the thing you get there, is you get some people who don't know the full details, make bad judgment calls, and say, no tablet, sorry, I think that's a toy. And then they end up sitting down there and making that person's life harder. The hospitals, I think, Blake, you might be able to tell me, they're very common for doing that sort of thing.
Yes. If you want to hear it, self-plug, But if you want to hear a good story about my struggles in hospital, go back and watch one of our episodes on Paul the other one from a few months ago. And that'll give you a bit of insight into what I went through, so I don't need to go on and on and on this. And take up some time.
Yeah.
But what I would recommend is we should replay that when Nick's with us tonight, because he has a lot of strong views on that.
Oh yes, but that show tonight's about the gang legislation and the was it Education Amendment Bill?
All right, well, that'd be great. That'd be good. Yeah, I might join them as a spectator. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you know, we need more viewers. Feel free to share it around. We need more subscribers.
Yes, we do.
We're going to have to call this show to an end.